one of the common questions people will ask me is they'll say, well, if there's so many toxins in our food and, if we shouldn't be eating a lot of these things that, that are all over the place and, that I grew up eating, then why don't I see more of this information in the media? And the reason why is because big food industry that makes all of these different processed foods. When you go into the grocery store, all the foods in the middle aisles, all those foods are made by big food industry, pretty much just about all of them. And they're making incredibly high profits off of these foods. And unfortunately, most people are buying these things and it's detrimental to their health. They're driving up inflammation in their system. They're throwing off their blood sugar. We've got an epidemic of diabetes, obesity, of fatty liver disease, of metabolic dysfunction in our society. And one of the primary reasons is because we're eating these foods. And most people think, well, if it's in the grocery store, it's got to be okay for me. It's not going to kill me. It's going to be fine, at least if I eat it in quote unquote moderation. But, that's not really the truth. When we're eating a lot of ultra processed foods, we are going to drive up inflammation in our body. We are going to create insulin resistance, diabetes, and ultimately we're going to end up with a chronic degenerative disease or autoimmune disease that ends up causing us to be on medications and living off medications for many, many years and ultimately suffering and oftentimes dying early. And so this is a really, really big problem, but we have to understand the food industry really profits off of us buying their ultra processed foods, and they're not as concerned about our overall health. And what their goal is to give us such a hyper palliative or such an incredible experience when we consume their food, such an incredible mouth experience and such a dopamine hit in our brain that we become addicted to the flavors in their particular food. So we continue to eat them and we have trouble stopping eating them. And therefore we purchase more and more and more of them. And, a good percentage of our society has true food addictions to these ultra processed foods. Now, in this podcast, what I want to go over is this Washington Post investigative article here. And this was September 13th, 2023. It says the food industry pays influencer dietitians to shape your eating habits. Registered dietitians are being paid to post videos that promote diet soda, sugar, and supplements on Instagram and TikTok. This is really key. A lot of people will say, Dr. Jockers, your information is different from what my dietitian told me, or I went to the hospital and the dietitian there said I should do such and such and such. I should eat more whole grains. I should eat, I should stay away from saturated fat. I should look for, any foods that have cholesterol in them and not eat them. I hear all of these types of things. And we have to realize is that dietitians and in nutrition school, that dietitians are actually trained by textbooks and by information that's being funded by big food. Unfortunately, I took nutrition in college as well. I took it in my undergrad and in graduate school. And unfortunately, all that information, just about all of it, was wrong. I had to read books outside of what I was reading to prepare for tests. And I had to study outside of that to really learn functional nutrition. So your typical nutritionist or dietitian, they are learning from big food industry. In fact, big food industry is who sponsors the various conferences and organizations that they're a part of. And so they're constantly hearing this information. Sugar isn't bad. It's part of a healthy, balanced diet. Artificial sweeteners aren't bad. Seed oils like corn oil, canola oil, they're actually healthy because they're not saturated fat. Stay away from the saturated fat and instead consume the polyunsaturated fat. But what we didn't realize and what they're not taught is what these fats actually do. High polyunsaturated fats are very fragile in the body. They're very reactive to free radical damage, right? So they're highly reactive. They become damaged. They create massive amounts of oxidative stress in the system, whereas saturated fats are very stable in the body and they can't be oxidized in the same way. And so therefore they reduce oxidative stress in our system. But dietitians, nutritionists aren't taught that. They're just taught Saturated fat increases cholesterol. More cholesterol you have, the higher risk of heart disease. But that's not true. That is old science, or I guess you could say an old idea, an old theory. It's not actually based on real evidence-based science, but these are things that they're taught. They're taught that sugar is fine. Sugar doesn't feed cancer. Sugar is a normal part of our healthy diet. We should all be consuming a certain amount of sugar. It's part of a healthy, balanced diet. So that's what they're told. And so I'm going to go through this Washington Post article. This is really well done. They said, as the World Health Organization raised questions this summer about the risks of popular artificial sweetener, a new hashtag began spreading on the social media accounts of health professionals. It said, hashtag safety of aspartame. Steph Grasso, a registered dietitian from Oakton, Virginia, used the hashtag and told her 2.2 million followers on TikTok that the WHO warnings about artificial sweeteners were clickbait based on low quality science. Another dietitian, Kara Harbstreet of Kansas City, reassured her Instagram followers not to worry about fear-mongering headlines about aspartame because the evidence doesn't suggest there's a reason for concern. In a third video, Mary Ellen Phillips, a Houston area dietitian who specializes in diabetes care, sipped from a glass of soda and told her Instagram viewers that artificial sweeteners satisfy the desire for sweetness without affecting blood sugar or insulin levels. What these dietitians didn't make clear was that they were being paid to post these videos by American Beverage, a trade and lobbying group representing Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, and other companies. In all, at least 35 posts from a dozen health professionals were part of the coordinated campaign by American Beverage. The trade group paid an undisclosed amount to 10 registered dietitians, as well as a physician and fitness influencer, to use their social media accounts to help blunt the WHO's claims that aspartame, a mainstay of Diet Coke and other sodas, is ineffective for weight loss and possibly carcinogenic. So they were paying these influencers here. And there's all kinds of studies. In fact, Environmental Health 2021, April 2021, has a great published article, aspartame and cancer, new evidence for causation. And this article, let me read this background. Aspartame is one of the world's most widely used artificial sweeteners as an ingredient in more than 5,000 food products globally. Our particularly important use is in low-calorie beverages consumed by children and pregnant women. The Ramzani Institute reported in 2006 and 2007 that aspartame causes dose-related increases in malignant tumors in multiple organs in rats and mice. Increased cancer risk was seen at low exposure levels approaching the acceptable daily intake. Prenatal exposures caused increased malignancies in rodent offspring at lower doses than in adults. So let me read that again. Prenatal, okay, so so this is a pregnant woman. Prenatal exposures caused increased malignancies in rodent offspring at lower doses than in adults. These findings generated intense controversy focused on the accuracy of Ramzani Institute's diagnosis of hematopoietic and lymphoid tissue tumors. Critics made the claim that pulmonary lesions observed in aspartame-exposed animals were inflammatory lesions caused by mycoplasma infection rather than malignant neoplasms. So anyways, they went ahead, they looked at these studies, and they did an immunohistochemical analysis using a battery of markers to really assess and understand this better. This is what they found. These new findings confirm that aspartame is a chemical carcinogen in rodents, and it says the findings were this immunohistochemical and morphological reevaluation confirmed the original diagnosis of malignancy in 92.3% of cases. 6 lesions originally diagnosed as lymphoma were reclassified, 3 to lymphoid hyperplasia and 3 to chronic inflammation with fibrosis. There was no evidence of mycoplasma infection. So showed that these types of lymphoid tissue tumors increased when aspartame was consumed, and the consumption level was equivalent to what people are consuming. And so, of course, the World Health Organization, they came about and they said, okay, it's a possible carcinogen. Aspartame is a possible carcinogen, but aspartame is one of the main ingredients in popular diet drinks. And so, of course, that's Diet Coke. I mean, this could have raised about a whole bunch of different possible lawsuits and obviously loss of a lot of business for Coca-Cola, PepsiCo. And so they went about and they created a company called American Beverage, which is a trade and lobbying group. And this trade and lobbying group, American Beverage, they sponsor conferences teaching nutritionists and dietitians. They went ahead and they paid, these 10 health influencers to and they gave them talking points on how aspartame is actually healthy. It's fine. Don't believe, the fear mongering. And that is a serious issue. And this is why it's so important to understand where you're getting your health information from. And so I'm going to go on and continue to read this Washington Post article. It says the campaign, which the beverage group acknowledged organizing, highlighted a little known tactic the multi-billion-dollar food and beverage industry is using to sway consumers faced with often contradictory health messages about the popular products. The food, beverage, and dietary supplement industries are paying dozens of registered dietitians that collectively have millions of social media followers to help sell products and deliver industry-friendly messages on Instagram and TikTok, according to an analysis by the Washington Post and The Examination, a new nonprofit newsroom specializing in global public health reporting. The analysis of thousands of posts found that companies and industry groups paid dietitians for content that encouraged viewers to eat candy and ice cream, downplayed the health risks of highly processed foods, and pushed unproven supplements, messages that run counter to decades of scientific evidence in healthy eating. The review found that among 68 dietitians with 10,000 or more social media followers on TikTok or Instagram, about half had promoted food, beverages, or supplements to their combined 11 million followers within the last year. Now, I don't have an issue with health influencers talking about various supplements, talking about foods, talking about beverages. In general, I think that's great. I think that's really good. If you're having a good experience with a supplement, or if you've seen patients or people you've worked with have really good experiences with supplements, wonderful. Share that with your audience. If there's certain foods, I'm talking about foods all the time. I'm talking about lemon water. I'm talking about avocados. I'm talking about grass-fed organic animal products. I'm talking about things like grass-fed meat sticks from Paleo Valley, one of my sponsors and a company that I use every single day. I use their products. I consume their foods. I don't think that that's an issue. I think the issue is when you have health influencers that are telling you foods that are, we have been well researched, that are ultra processed foods that we know are high glycemic. They spike your blood sugar, they spike your insulin levels, and they drive up inflammation in the body. And you have health influencers out there telling people that these foods are okay as part of a balanced diet, that it's fine to consume them, and actually encouraging, in some cases, not all cases, but in some cases, encouraging parents to actually feed these things to children. That is a problem. That's a serious issue.